Tae-Won sat in his small office on the council citadel and stared at the screen in front of him. Another report. Another list of problems that needed fixing. Another document that nobody would read. He had been doing this job for 15 years now, and he knew exactly what would happen. He would send the report. Someone would mark it as received. Then it would disappear into the vast digital archives of the Galactic Council, never to be seen again. The report was important. Station Gamma 7 had a failing power coupling that would cause a complete shutdown in 3 months if nobody fixed it. Tae-Won had found the problem during a routine inspection. He had written a clear explanation. He had included diagrams. He had even calculated the exact cost of repairs versus the cost of letting it fail. The second number was much, much larger. He pressed send and leaned back in his chair. Through the window of his office, he could see the swirling colors of the neutron star, Coveth 9. The Council Citadel had orbited this star for 300 years. It was supposed to represent unity, cooperation, all the species of the galaxy, working together for a better future. Tae-Won wondered if anyone actually believed that anymore. His communicator buzzed. It was Hana, calling from the engineering section on the other side of the station. Her face appeared on his screen, and she looked tired. She always looked tired these days. "They did it again," she said without greeting him first. "What happened?" "The Quillarians had another coolant leak in their manufacturing section. They want my team to fix it. That's the 9th time this month we've been pulled off our own work to fix someone else's problems." Tae-Won nodded slowly. "Did you tell them your team has its own projects?" "Of course I did. They said human engineers are better at this kind of work. They said it would only take a few hours." Hana rubbed her eyes. "It took 3 days last time. 3 days of my people working double shifts, while the Quillarians watched and complained that we weren't working fast enough. Will you do it?" "What choice do I have? If I refuse, they'll file a complaint. Then I'll get called into a meeting where they'll remind me that cooperation is the foundation of the council." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'll do it. We always do it." After the call ended, Tae-Won sat in silence for a while. He thought about all the reports he had written, all the problems he had solved, all the crises he had prevented that nobody knew about because they never happened. That was the thing about good work. When you did it right, it was invisible. 3 levels above him, in the Grand Council chamber, Ambassador Rion stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species. He was 68 years old and had spent 40 of those years in this room. He knew every corner of it. He knew which seats had the best acoustics. He knew which counselors could be reasoned with and which ones had already made up their minds before any discussion began. Today, High Arbiter Molkith was proposing something new. The Arbiter was a member of the Throne species, tall and covered in silver scales that caught the light whenever he moved. He stood at the central podium and spoke in a voice that carried across the chamber without any electronic help. "We have reached a point of maturity in our council," Molkith said. "Many species who once needed guidance have now learned to stand on their own. It is time we recognize this growth and adjust our structure accordingly." Rian listened carefully. He had learned long ago that the most important words in any political speech were the ones that came after phrases like "it is time," and "we must consider." Humanity has served well as mediators and technical advisors, the Arbiter continued. But we must ask ourselves if this representation is still necessary. Other species have learned these skills. Perhaps human resources would be better allocated elsewhere. I propose we reduce human representation on the council by half and redistribute those positions to species who are still developing. Several counselors nodded. A few whispered to their aides. Counselor Vex Thara, the Quillarian security chief, smiled with too many teeth. and waited for someone to object. Nobody did. Finally, Molkith looked at him directly. Does the human delegation have any response? Rian stood slowly. He smoothed the front of his simple gray suit. He looked around the chamber at all the faces, scales, and other features that represented the vast diversity of the galaxy. Then he spoke 2 words. Noted. Thank you. He sat back down. The chamber went quiet for a moment. Several counselors seemed surprised. They had expected an argument, a defense, perhaps even anger. But Rian simply sat with his hands folded, his face calm and unreadable. The vote happened the next day. The proposal passed with a strong majority. Human representation would be cut in half over the next year. It was decided. It was official. It was, the council agreed, a natural evolution of their partnership. 40-8 hours after that vote, every human in council space received a message. The encryption was sophisticated, the kind that would take even council security weeks to break. The message was short. Project Homebound is approved. Begin Phase 1. That was all it said. But every human who received it understood exactly what it meant. Hana read the message while standing in her quarters after another 16-hour shift. She looked around at the small room she had called home for 6 years. She thought about all the systems she had repaired, all the innovations she had designed, all the problems she had solved. Then she opened her closet and pulled out an empty storage container. She began to pack. Tae-Won read the message in his office. He looked at the stack of unread reports on his screen. 847 of them, going back years. All marked as received. None of them acted upon. He created a new folder and moved them all into it. He labeled the folder Preventable Problems and set it to automatically forward to the Council's central administration. Then he began deleting his personal files. Across 200 stations, habitats, and installations throughout Council space, humans began the same quiet process. They packed their belongings. They transferred their work files. They made arrangements for transport. They said nothing to their non-human colleagues. They filed no complaints. They made no announcements. They simply began to leave when Councillor Threnduk, the infrastructure minister, asked a human engineer why she was leaving. She smiled politely and said her contract was complete. When Vexthara demanded to know why 3 human security advisors had resigned in the same day, they each gave the same answer: personal reasons. When junior counselors tried to ask Ambassador Rion what was happening, they found his office empty and a simple note on the door. Thank you for the opportunity to serve. Contract fulfilled. Nobody understood yet. The departures seemed random, individual decisions. The council had 47 member species and trillions of citizens. What did it matter if a few thousand humans decided to leave? They would understand soon enough. 15 days after the humans started leaving, Station Kep 7 lost its water. Not all of it, not at first. The recycling system that turned wastewater back into clean drinking water simply stopped working at 3 a.m, station time. By the time anyone noticed, half the station was without water for basic functions. Kyung-ho had been the maintenance coordinator for Kep 7 for 12 years. He was supposed to leave on the transport that morning, but the station commander had called him personally, begging for help. Just one more day, the commander said. Just help us understand what's wrong, and then you can go. Kyung-ho stood in the water recycling plant with the replacement engineering team. They were good engineers. They had excellent training and years of experience. But they stared at the massive system in front of them, like it was a puzzle with missing pieces. The main processor is functioning, one engineer said, checking his scanner. But the water isn't flowing through the secondary filters. Did you check the bypass valve? Kyung-ho asked. There is no bypass valve on the schematic. Yes, there is. It's just not labeled on any official diagram. Kyung-ho walked to a panel on the far wall and opened it. Inside was a valve that looked identical to a dozen others. This one. It gets stuck sometimes. You have to turn it counterclockwise 3 times, then clockwise once, then counterclockwise again. If you just turn it normally, the system thinks it's closed even when it's open. The engineer stared at him. That's not in any manual. I know. The human team that installed this system 20 years ago found the problem and came up with the solution. They told the next team, who told the next team, who told me. It was supposed to be fixed properly, but the parts never arrived, so we just worked around it. Kyung-ho closed the panel. There are probably 50 things like this on this station. Little problems that were never officially fixed, just managed. Can you show us? No. My transport leaves in 4 hours, and I'm going to be on it. He left them there, still staring at the wall panel. As he walked back to his quarters, he passed 3 more groups of confused engineers trying to understand systems that humans had maintained for years. He felt a small pang of guilt, but pushed it away. He had sent 17 reports about these problems. Nobody had read them. That wasn't his fault. On the medical research station above the planet Thelios, Bi-Ora was packing the last of her equipment. She was 29 years old and had spent 5 years developing countermeasures for biological weapons. It was important work, the kind that saved millions of lives by preventing disasters that never happened. Her replacement was a Krovan scientist named Thelkor. He was brilliant and thorough, and he had asked Bi-Ora hundreds of questions over the past week. Now he stood in the doorway of the lab, holding a datapad and looking worried. "I've been reading your research notes," Thelkor said, "but I'm having trouble understanding some of your references." "Which ones?" "You mention the Chicago approach in 17 different papers." "I can't find any scientific definition for this term." Bi-Ora smiled. "That's because it's not a scientific term. It's a reference to a historical event on Earth. During a disease outbreak in the city of Chicago, they used a specific containment method that combined social isolation with targeted medical intervention. When I say Chicago approach, I mean that specific combination. Why not just say combined containment method? Because there are a dozen different combined containment methods. The Chicago approach is a specific one with specific ratios and timing. Any human reading my notes would know exactly what I meant." Thelkor's face, which was covered in fine blue fur, seemed to droop. "How many references like this are in your research?" "I don't know. Maybe 100? I never counted. Will you explain them before you leave?" Bi-Ora looked at the time. Her transport was leaving in 6 hours. She looked at her research notes, thousands of pages documenting 5 years of work. She thought about explaining every cultural reference, every Earth historical event, every human idiom she had used without thinking about it. "I don't have time," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, but any human researcher could explain them. Maybe ask one of them. There are no human researchers left on this station. You're the last one." Bi-Ora hadn't known that. She felt something cold in her stomach. "Then I guess you'll have to figure it out. The science is all there. The references are just shortcuts." She left 3 hours later. Thelkor stood in the lab, surrounded by brilliant research that he could only half understand. In the Council Citadel, Counselor Threndok was discovering a pattern. Station Kep 7 wasn't the only place with problems. In the past 2 weeks, dozens of systems had failed across Council space. None of them were catastrophic. None of them made headlines. But all of them required human technicians to fix properly. A trade dispute between the Veek and Noan species had turned into a 3-day standoff over tariff interpretations. Usually, a human mediator would have resolved it in a few hours by finding common ground both species could accept. Instead, the Council's assigned throne arbitrator had sided completely with the Vec. Making the Norn so angry, they threatened to leave the Council entirely. A cargo ship had crashed into a station because the docking computer misread the pilot's intent. A human traffic controller would have caught the mistake. The 3 non-human controllers on duty had followed the computer's instructions exactly, because that was the proper procedure. Threndok brought his concerns to High Arbiter Molkith. The Arbiter listened with visible impatience. "Systems fail," Molkith said. "This is normal. We have millions of systems across hundreds of stations. Some of them will always have problems. It's basic mathematics. But these problems are all in systems that humans used to maintain," Threndok insisted. "And they're happening right after the humans started leaving. Correlation is not causation, Counselor. The humans are leaving because we reduced their representation. The systems are failing because they're old and need replacement. These are 2 separate issues. Are they?" Molkith's silver scales rippled with annoyance. "Are you suggesting we made a mistake in reducing human representation?" Threndok hesitated. In Council politics, admitting a mistake was dangerous. It showed weakness. It invited challenges. "I'm suggesting we should investigate the connection." "There is no connection. Other species will adapt. They will learn. That's the entire point of our decision. We cannot rely on humans forever." The conversation ended there. But Threndok left the Arbiter's office feeling uneasy. He had been on the Council for 30 years, and he had developed an instinct for when things were about to go wrong. That instinct was screaming at him now. Counselor Vexthara had a different concern. As security chief, he monitored all ship movements in and out of Council space. Over the past 2 weeks, he had watched human ships leaving in numbers that seemed too coordinated to be coincidence. They weren't filing proper flight plans. When questioned, human ship captains gave vague answers about personal travel or family matters. But Vexthara noticed they were all heading in the same direction, toward the Galactic Rim, toward the unexplored regions where the Council had no authority. He tried to stop one ship, a transport carrying 300 humans. The captain was a woman named Hana. When Vexthara demanded to know her destination, she smiled politely and said she was going home. "Where is home?" he asked. "Somewhere that isn't here," she replied. He could have detained the ship. He could have forced them to stay. But on what grounds? They had committed no crimes. They owed no debts. Their contracts, when he checked, were all properly fulfilled. He let them go and watched the ship accelerate toward the rim. Then he added another entry to his growing list of concerning patterns. By day 30, 40% of humans had left Council space. The rest were packing dot and across 200 stations. Systems that had run smoothly for decades were beginning to crack. 2 months after the first humans left, the Council faced 3 disasters at the same time, and nobody could understand how it had happened so quickly. The first disaster was a plague. A simple agricultural disease had appeared on a farming world called Pelos 9. It affected a grain crop that 17 species depended on for food. The disease wasn't new. It had appeared before, 15 years ago, and human agricultural specialists had contained it in 3 weeks. This time, without those specialists, the disease spread to 3 more worlds in the first month. Then 6 more worlds. Then 12. The Council sent their best xenobiology experts. They studied the disease. They understood how it worked. But understanding wasn't the same as stopping it. The human specialists had known not just the science, but also how to work with local farmers, how to convince them to destroy infected crops, how to set up quarantine zones that actually worked because people cooperated instead of resisted. Without that knowledge, the quarantine zones became prisons. Farmers hid infected crops instead of reporting them. The disease spread faster, A second disaster was political. Two species, the Thelvani and the Cross, had been arguing over a border region for 30 years. It was a minor dispute, the kind that flared up occasionally and then calmed down. Human mediators had managed it carefully, giving each side small victories, keeping the tension at a level where both sides could live with their dissatisfaction. But there were no human mediators anymore. The Council sent a Meskin arbitrator who believed in strict legal interpretations. He reviewed the border treaties and made a decision based purely on the written words. The Thelvani were right, legally. The Cross had no claim that the Cross felt betrayed. They had accepted the previous arrangement because it felt fair, even if it wasn't quite legal. Now they were told they had nothing. 3 days after the arbitrator's decision, Cross military ships crossed the disputed border. The Thelvani responded. Neither side wanted a war, but neither side wanted to back down. The shooting started on a Tuesday. The third disaster was technical. The long-range communication network that connected all Council stations began failing. Not all at once. Just small problems at first. A delay here. A dropped connection there. But the problems multiplied. Within 2 weeks, 20 stations had lost reliable communication with the central citadel. Engineers investigated. They found the problem quickly enough. The network used a complex synchronization protocol that required constant tiny adjustments. Human technicians had been making those adjustments for years. They had documented the process, but the documentation assumed knowledge that other species didn't have. What seemed obvious to a human engineer was mysterious to everyone else. Sang-Woo was the only crisis negotiator left in Council space. He was 52 years old and had planned to leave a month ago, but his contract didn't expire for another 23 days. So he stayed and worked. He worked 16-hour days, then 18, then 20. He slept in his office between emergency calls. They brought him the plague situation first. He called every contact he still had in the agricultural sector. Most of the humans were gone, but a few remained on the farming worlds, finishing their contracts. He got them on a call with the xenobiology experts and translated between scientific language and practical farming knowledge. They made progress. Not enough, but some. Then they brought him the border war. He spent 48 hours on a secure channel with Thelvani and cross-military commanders, finding the words that would let both sides stop shooting without losing face. He succeeded. The shooting stopped. But both sides stayed at the border with weapons ready, waiting for an excuse to start again. Then they brought him the communication problem, and the water crisis on Station Gamma 7, and the power failure on the civilian habitat orbiting Kelaus, and 17 other emergencies that all seemed to happen at once. On his 46th hour without sleep, the Council offered him a new position, Director of Crisis Response. Full authority, unlimited resources, a salary 10 times what he currently made. Sang-Woo read the offer on his screen while drinking his 8th cup of coffee that day. He checked the date. 17 days until his contract expired. No, thank you, he wrote back. My contract ends in 17 days. The Council representative who received his reply didn't understand. They sent another message. We can negotiate any terms you want. Name your price. Sang-Woo deleted the message and went back to work. Yuna was one of 3 humans who could translate the Krovan language. It wasn't just difficult. It was structured in a way that human brains seemed to process better than any other species' brains. Something about the way Krovans organized information matched patterns in human thinking. The Council offered her the leadership of the entire Xenolinguistics department. They offered her a permanent position on the Council itself. They offered her anything she could want. She declined all of it. Her shuttle was scheduled to leave in 4 days. In the Council chamber. Counselor Pelmara stood before the assembled representatives and presented numbers that made the room go silent. Pelmara was the council treasurer, a member of the Antheri species, small and covered in green scales that turned blue when she was stressed. Right now, her scales were almost completely blue. "I have calculated the cost of the human departure," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she held her data pad. "In the past 2 months, we have spent 43 trillion credits on emergency responses. 43 trillion. That doesn't include the economic damage from the plague, which is still spreading. That doesn't include the cost of the Thelvani Cross conflict. That doesn't include the long-term damage to our infrastructure." She pulled up a chart on the main display. Humans made up 3.2% of the council population, but they handled 31% of all crisis responses, 47% of infrastructure innovation, and 89% of successful mediations between incompatible species. Another chart. We paid human workers an average of 12,000 credits per year. We are now paying other species an average of 30,000 credits per year to do the same work, and they're achieving about 60% of the results. Molkith stood. His silver scales were dull, which meant he was angry. "Are you saying we made a mistake?" "I'm saying we didn't understand what we had." Pelmara's scales flashed dark blue. "Every human worker we lost is costing us triple to replace. And most of them can't be replaced at all. The crisis negotiators, the cultural mediators, the engineers who understood our systems because they built them. Other species will learn. How long will that take? Years? Decades? How much will it cost us while they learn?" Vexthara spoke from his seat. "We could recall the humans. Order them back. On what authority?" Pelmara turned to face him. "They broke no contracts. They violated no laws. They simply left." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some counselors defended the original decision. Others demanded action. A few suggested sending ships to force the humans to return. Ambassador Rian was attending the session remotely, his image projected from a transport ship somewhere beyond the rim. He had been silent through the entire presentation. Now Molkith addressed him directly. "Ambassador, the Council demands that humanity halt its departure immediately." Rian's face was calm. He looked older than he had 2 months ago, but his voice was steady. "We were told we were redundant. We believed you. We made an error in judgment. We're correcting it. No, you made your judgment very clear. Now we're making ours. This is not a request. The Council is declaring humans an essential species. You are forbidden from leaving Council space." Rian smiled then. It was not a happy smile. "We signed no such contracts. We owe no such debt. This conversation is over. Goodbye, Arbiter." His image disappeared from the screen. The Council passed an emergency resolution that same day. All humans were declared essential species. All departures were forbidden. Heavy fines would be imposed on any human who tried to leave. Ships would be stopped at the borders, but the borders were vast, and the humans were already leaving through 100 different routes. And every human who received news of the Council's declaration had the same reaction. They accelerated their departure plans. Sang-Woo left the day his contract expired. He walked out of his office, handed his access codes to his replacement, and headed for the docking bay. Security tried to stop him. He showed them his contract, properly fulfilled. They had no legal grounds to hold him. As his shuttle pulled away from the Council Citadel, he looked back at the massive station orbiting Kovath 9. He had spent 20 years there. He had saved it from a dozen disasters. He had prevented problems that would have killed thousands. He felt nothing as he watched it shrink in the distance. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense of completion. His work was done. 5 months after the first humans left, less than 1% remained in Council space. Those who stayed were people who couldn't leave for medical reasons, or who had contracts they refused to break, or who simply had nowhere else to go. They watched from the edges as the Council fell apart around them. The agricultural plague had reached 40 worlds. 4.3 million beings had died. More would die before the disease was contained, if it was ever contained. The xenobiology teams had made progress, but without human agricultural specialists who understood both the science and the practical reality of farming. Every solution took 3 times longer and worked half as well. The Thelvani Cross War had officially lasted 8 months. It devastated both species. Hundreds of ships destroyed, thousands of soldiers dead, entire colonies bombarded, all over a border dispute that could have been prevented by a single human mediator spending 72 hours finding common ground. When the fighting finally ended, neither side had won. They simply ran out of resources to continue. They signed a peace treaty that satisfied nobody and guaranteed they would fight again within a generation. A human mediator would have crafted something better, something that lasted. The communication network never fully recovered. Engineers had patched it enough to keep basic functions working, but the elegant system that had once connected the entire council now limped along with constant failures and delays. Messages that should have taken seconds now took hours. Some stations remained isolated for days at a time. Counselor Pelmara stood in front of a mostly empty council chamber and presented her final report. Most counselors were attending remotely because travel between stations had become unreliable. The chamber that once held representatives of 47 species now held maybe 20 in person. The rest were flickering holograms that sometimes cut out mid-sentence. The total cost is now 47 trillion credits, Pelmara said. Her scales were a permanent dark blue now. She hadn't slept properly in months. That includes infrastructure repair, emergency response, medical care for plague victims, and economic damage from the war. It doesn't include the intangible costs, the diplomatic relationships we've damaged, the trust we've lost, the reputation of the Council, which is now questioned by our own member species. She paused and looked around the chamber. High Arbiter Molkith has resigned. I've been appointed interim arbiter until we can hold proper elections. My first action is to present you with an uncomfortable truth. We didn't just lose human workers. We lost something more important. We lost their knowledge. A new display appeared on the screens. When humans left, they took with them thousands of years of accumulated cultural knowledge. Mediation techniques that worked because humans understood how different species thought. Engineering solutions that seemed obvious to them but mysterious to everyone else. Crisis management protocols that required a specific kind of flexible thinking that humans seemed to have naturally. We thought we could replace them, Pelmara continued. We were wrong. We can hire other species to do human jobs. We can train them. We can pay them more. But we can't give them human cultural context. We can't teach them to think like humans. And that's what we actually needed. Counselor Threnduk spoke up from his seat. What about artificial intelligence? Can we program systems to replicate human decision-making? We tried. The AI systems made decisions that were logically perfect and practically useless. Humans didn't just make logical decisions. They made decisions that accounted for emotions, culture, history, pride, fear, hope, and a dozen other factors that are difficult to quantify. That's why they were so effective at mediation. They didn't just solve problems. They solved them in ways that made everyone feel heard. So what do we do? Another counselor asked. We find them. We apologize. And we hope they'll forgive us. The council sent a delegation. 5 ships, each carrying representatives of different species. Pelmara led them personally. They searched the galactic rim for 3 weeks before they found the first human settlements. They weren't hidden. The humans had simply gone to regions the Council had never bothered to explore. Uninhabited systems with habitable planets. Quiet corners of space where they could start fresh. The settlements were thriving. That was the first thing Pelmara noticed. Clean, efficient, well organized. The humans had been there for only a few months, but they had already established functioning communities with infrastructure that worked better than some council stations that were centuries old. They landed on a planet the humans had named New Haven. Tae-Won met them at the landing pad. He was wearing simple work clothes and looked healthier than Pelmara remembered. Less stressed. Almost content. "Counselor Pelmara," he said with a polite nod. "This is unexpected." "We need to talk," she said. They walked through the settlement. Pelmara saw humans working together, building homes, planting crops, setting up power systems. She also saw something else. 3 ships in orbit that weren't human. Representatives from species she didn't recognize. "You've made contact with new species," she said. 3 so far. They're from beyond the rim. They had no idea the Council existed. Tae-Won smiled slightly. "They're nice. We're establishing trade relationships." "Have you invited them to join the Council?" "No." They reached a simple building that served as a community center. Inside, Ambassador Rian was waiting. He looked even better than Tae-Won. Younger somehow. He gestured for them to sit. "Ambassador," Pelmara began, "the Council has sent me to deliver an official apology." "I'm not an ambassador anymore," Rian said. "I'm just Rian now. But I'll listen." Pelmara took a breath. "We made a mistake. We didn't understand your value. We took you for granted. And we've paid for that mistake in ways we're still discovering. The Council is in crisis. We need help. You need human help." "Yes." Rian leaned back in his chair. "What exactly do you want?" "We want humanity to return to Council space. We're prepared to offer full autonomy. Your own sector. Your own governance. Complete control over your own affairs. You would be members of the Council, in name only if you prefer. We just need access to your expertise." "You mean you need us to fix your problems?" "Yes." The room was quiet. Tae-Won stood by the window, looking out at the settlement. Finally, Rian spoke. "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the dismissal. It wasn't being told we were redundant. It was realizing that you never actually saw us at all." "What do you mean?" "You saw useful tools. You saw people who solved problems. But you never saw the work itself. Every system we maintained. Every crisis we prevented. Every time we stopped a disaster from happening. All of that was invisible to you because we did it well. Good work is invisible. And you never thought to look for it." Pelmara's scales had turned almost purple. "You're right. We didn't. And I'm sorry." Apology noted. Rian's voice wasn't cold, just matter of fact. "But here's the thing. We don't need you anymore. We needed the Council once. We needed the trade networks. The security. The community of species working together. We believed in it. But you taught us we could exist without it. You taught us our value. So thank you for that lesson. So you're refusing." "I'm saying we're not interested in returning to Council space. We're building something new here. Something where our contributions are seen and valued. Where we're not taken for granted." Pelmara stood. "The Council is prepared to offer anything. Name your price." "There is no price. This isn't about money or resources or political power. This is about dignity. You took ours for granted. Now we're taking it back." The delegation left empty-handed. As their ships departed, Palmyra looked back at New Haven through the viewport. She saw the settlement growing, expanding, thriving. She saw the ships of 3 non-council species in orbit, trading peacefully. She realized that humanity didn't need the council. They never really had. The council had needed them. And now it was too late. Docked back on the council citadel, Palmyra presented her report. The chamber was silent as she explained that humanity had refused all offers. "They're gone," she said simply. "They're building their own civilization beyond the rim. And they're making alliances with species we've never met. Can we force them back?" Vexthara asked. "No. They're beyond our territory, beyond our authority. And even if we could, what would we gain? Hostile workers who do the minimum required. That's not what we need." Molkith, attending as a regular counselor now, spoke bitterly. "So we just accept defeat?" "It's not a defeat," Palmyra said quietly. "It's a consequence. We made a choice. We told skilled, valuable people they weren't needed. They believed us. And now we live with the result. What do we do now? We adapt. We learn. We spend the next decade repairing the damage we caused. And we make sure we never take any species for granted again." The reforms began the next day. But everyone knew it was too little, too late. The council would survive, but it would never be the same. The wound humanity's departure had left would take generations to heal. And somewhere beyond the rim, humanity continued to build its new own, free from a council that had never truly valued them. 1 year after the exodus began, the council had stabilized, barely. The word that best described it now was functional. Not efficient, not elegant, just functional enough to keep operating. A plague had finally been contained after claiming 7 million lives across 43 worlds. The cost of containment was twice what it would have been with human agricultural specialists. The solution was half as effective. Some regions would never fully recover. The Thelvanny Cross War had ended, but the peace was fragile. Both species maintained military fleets at their borders. Both sides waited for the other to make a mistake. Without human mediators to manage the ongoing tension, everyone knew it was only a matter of time before fighting started again. The infrastructure continued to fail in small ways every day. Power outages, communication delays, water system problems, life support glitches. Nothing catastrophic, just a constant stream of problems that cost time, money, and lives. The council had hired thousands of new engineers and technicians. They worked hard. They were skilled, but they were learning systems that humans had built and maintained for centuries. Every solution took longer. Every fix was temporary. Counselor Palmyra sat in the High Arbiter's office, a position she had never wanted but couldn't refuse. She was reading reports from across council space. The economic damage report, the casualty report, the infrastructure failure report. All of them showed the same pattern. Slow improvement, painful adaptation, recovery measured in decades, not years. Her communicator buzzed. It was Threnduk. "We have a situation." "Another one. What now?" 3 more species are requesting to renegotiate their council terms. They want the same kind of autonomy and independence that we should have given humanity. Palmyra wasn't surprised. She had been expecting this. Which species? The Vekori, the Norn, and the Pelos colonies. All 3 were smaller species. Species that, like humans, provided specialized services that kept the council running. Species that had watched humanity walk away and wondered if they should do the same. What are they asking for? Full control over their own sectors. The right to refuse council assignments. Higher compensation. And respect. Threnduk paused. They actually wrote respect into their formal demands. Schedule negotiations. Give them what they want. All of it? All of it. We can't afford to lose anyone else. And they're right to ask. We should have been offering these terms all along. Palmara ended the call and returned to her reports. The truth was clear in every number, every statistic, every cost analysis. The Council had been built on the backs of species they had taken for granted. Humanity wasn't unique in that. They were just the first ones to realize they didn't have to accept it. The power structure of the Council was shifting. Smaller species were demanding better treatment. Larger species were learning that dominance wasn't the same as competence. And everyone was learning an expensive lesson about value beyond the rim. In the human settlements, life had taken on a comfortable rhythm. New Haven had grown from a small outpost to a thriving colony of 50,000. 5 more planets had been settled. 3 more species had made contact and established. Peaceful Relations. Hana stood in the engineering center of New Haven's primary station, reviewing designs for a new water purification system. Her team had grown from 20 to 200. They were building everything from scratch, and they were building it right. No shortcuts. No temporary fixes. Just clean, elegant solutions that would last. "How's it looking?" asked a young engineer named Ho. "Good. Really good. We'll have this online in 2 weeks." Hannah smiled. "And we'll actually document it properly this time. Complete schematics. Clear instructions. No hidden tricks that only we know about. Why bother? We're the ones who'll maintain it. Because that's how you build something that lasts. You don't make yourself indispensable. You make your work so clear that anyone can maintain it. That's the difference between a system that needs you and a system that respects you." Min Ho nodded slowly. "Is that why the Council fell apart when we left?" "Partly. But mostly it fell apart because they never bothered to understand what we were actually doing. They just assumed it would always be done." Sang-Woo was teaching a class. 50 young humans sat in a simple classroom, learning crisis negotiation techniques. He stood at the front, comfortable in a way he had never been in Council space. "The key to crisis negotiation isn't being smart," he told them. "It's being present. You have to see all sides. You have to understand what everyone needs, not just what they're saying they want. And you have to care about finding a solution that works for everyone." A student raised her hand. "But what if one side is clearly wrong? Then you still have to see their side, because they don't think they're wrong. And if you treat them like they're stupid or evil, they'll never work with you. You have to show them a path to do the right thing without losing face. That's the art of it. Did you do that for the Council?" Sang-Woo was quiet for a moment. "I tried. For 20 years I tried. But there's a limit to what one person can do. Eventually, I realized I was preventing disasters without fixing the problems that caused them. I was putting out fires while someone else kept starting them. That's not negotiation. That's just exhaustion. Do you regret leaving?" "No. Best decision I ever made." Next question. Bai O-Ra had continued her research on biological warfare prevention, but now she worked with a team of both human and non-human scientists from the 3 species humanity had befriended. They shared knowledge freely. They published everything. They built on each other's work instead of competing. One day, she received a message from Felkor, her replacement at the Council Research Station. He had finally finished translating her notes. It had taken him 11 months. "I understand your work now," he wrote. "It's brilliant. But I need to ask, why did you make it so hard to understand?" Ba-Ora thought about her response carefully. "I didn't make it hard. I just didn't make it easy. There's a difference. I assumed whoever read my notes would have the same context I did, the same cultural references. The same way of thinking. I was wrong to assume that. But honestly, I never thought I'd be the last human researcher there. I thought there would always be someone to explain. She never received a reply. 6 months after Pelmara's failed delegation, she received an unexpected message. It came from Rion, transmitted from New Haven. Interim Arbiter Pelmara, I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing to propose something. Not a return to council space. Not a reunion, but a partnership. Pelmara read the message 3 times before responding. I'm listening. The proposal was simple. Humanity would establish a formal alliance with the council. Not as members, as independent partners. Trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, mutual defense treaties, and most importantly, a consulting arrangement. We won't return to fix your problems, Rian's message explained, but we'll teach you how to fix them yourselves. We'll share our methods, our approaches, our knowledge, for a fair price and with full credit for our contributions. Pelmara brought the proposal to the council. The debate lasted 3 days. Some councilors saw it as an insult. Others saw it as a lifeline. Eventually, Necessity won. The alliance was approved. The formal signing happened on neutral ground, a space station halfway between council space and human settlements. Pelmara represented the council. Rian represented humanity. Tae-Wan and Hana were there as witnesses. This isn't a reconciliation, Pelmara said during the ceremony. I understand that. You're not coming back. We're not pretending nothing happened. No, Rian agreed. But it is an acknowledgement. We valued what we built with the council. We valued the idea of species working together. We still do. We just needed to be valued in return. Will that be enough? This partnership? Time will tell. But it's honest. And that's more than we had before. The agreement was signed. Trade began flowing between council space and human settlements. Human consultants started teaching council engineers and mediators and crisis negotiators. Not doing the work for them. Teaching them how to do it themselves. It was slow. It was expensive. But it was real. Sang-Woo watched the signing ceremony on a screen in New Haven. A student asked him what he thought about it. I think they learned, he said. It cost them 47 trillion credits. 7 million lives. Years of chaos. Their reputation. Their pride. But they learned. What did they learn? That respect isn't given. It's earned. And once you have it, you have to maintain it. You can't just assume people will stay, because they always have. You can't take value for granted. He smiled. It's a lesson humanity needed to learn too. We learned that we're worth more than we thought. That we don't need approval from people who don't value us. That we can build our own future. Was it worth it? All that suffering? All those deaths? Sang-Woo was quiet for a long time. That's not for me to answer. The council paid the price for their choices. We paid the price for ours. Everyone learned something. Maybe that's the best we can hope for. Years later, historians would look back at this period and call it the Great Reformation. The time when the council learned that power wasn't the same as value. When smaller species learned to demand respect. When humanity learned to walk away from situations that didn't serve them. But the people who lived through it didn't think about history. They thought about the daily work of building something better. Something more honest. Something that recognized everyone's value. The council recovered. It took decades. The structure changed. The power dynamics changed. Species that had been overlooked were given voices. Species that had dominated learned to listen. The wounds healed slowly, but they did heal. Humanity thrived beyond the rim. Their settlements grew into a small but prosperous civilization. They maintained their alliance with the council. They made new friends among the species beyond council space. They built a culture based on the lessons they had learned. And sometimes, on quiet nights, older humans would tell younger ones about the time they walked away from the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. Not because they were angry, not because they wanted revenge, simply because they knew their worth and refused to accept less. What happened to the council? The young ones would ask. They paid, the elders would answer. Not in punishment, not in revenge. They paid in the natural cost of losing something valuable they didn't appreciate. And maybe, in the end, that was the fairest price of all.